Hello and welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. We are reporting today from the Ukrainian town of Bucha, which is on the outskirts of Kiev. The bodies of dozens of people who were dumped in this mass grave behind me, evidence of which emerged more than a week back. These bodies are now being exhumed. There's a process of forensic examination which will take place. The Ukrainians say that there is clear-cut evidence in the town of Bucha that people were executed. The hands and arms of individuals were bound before they were killed. International investigators, including French investigators who've actually been here yesterday, would look into these allegations of war crimes against Russia. India, for its part, has said that there does need to be an international investigation to look into these allegations that these war crimes have indeed been committed by the Russians. Actual evidence of the extent of war crimes, potential war crimes, or the atrocities which have been committed against civilians is only now slowly coming to the fore, because with the Russians having left this part of the Ukraine, whether it is Bucha itself or Boryadanka or Irpin or some of the other areas, all near the Kiev zone itself and up north to the town of Chernobyl, there will be perhaps more evidence which comes to light on just what took place with any number of civilians who lost their lives. Our focus on this episode of Left, Right and Centre, the tragedy of Bucha. Alright, well, I'm in the town of Bucha on the outskirts of Kiev, and there have been horrific scenes which we've been witnessing now for the last couple of hours. Just about 2 or 3 feet away from me is the mass grave which was detected a little bit more than a week back. There have been any number of bodies which have now been exhumed from this mass grave. Forensic investigators, including international forensic investigators, are over here, and they're going to be trying to collect information on how exactly these individuals lost their lives. And this, the Ukrainians argue, would perhaps add to what they say is a body of evidence suggesting Russian war crimes in this particular area. Bucha is one of the areas which is now accessible, an area which the Russians have actually left. There's another body as I speak which has just been recovered now. It's in a black body bag. It's now going to be placed on that platform that you actually see, and it's going to be moved across to the other side in a while from now. Now, about this particular site itself, this was actually dug by the Ukrainians a couple of weeks back. There are believed to be at least 57 bodies in this particular area, but they say they could in fact be more. And it's post this process of forensic investigation that there's going to be a DNA survey which is going to be done, because they don't know the identity of all of the individuals who've been found over here. They're going to be looking to see for marks for torture. They're going to be looking to see if these individuals died of shrapnel injuries, or in fact they died of other causes. They were executed, because in other parts of Bucha there has been evidence of individuals with their hands bound and shot execution style. Now, when these people died is still quite unclear at this stage. Were they killed or did they die as a result of the fighting in the early phases of what has now been a 40-day plus war in this country, or in fact did they die more recently? Were they victims of Russian atrocities? Now, India for its part has always said, particularly now in more recent times, in more clarity and perhaps more directly, that there needs to be an international investigation to look into the allegations of atrocities being committed over here in Bucha. So the process towards that is well and truly underway. This is the church which we actually saw on satellite images and subsequently on video as well, and there were these initial reports which had come in more than a week back that near this area there was a 40-foot long grave, which had a mass grave which had actually been dug. That has now been located, and as you can see, the platform being moved over here. And I can't tell you how bizarre it is that, you know, we were seeing these satellite pictures and we were seeing the amateur video which was emerging from Bucha, and today we are at this particular site where these forensic investigators, they've been digging out these bodies from this mass grave, and they've actually now they've been putting it onto the little platform attached to a crane and then bringing it across to the opposite side. These are being moved to various areas, including hospitals where they're going to be kept before they are eventually buried, and that will take place in another area. So that's the process. As you can see, it's been going on, and the area is, it's difficult to actually stand over here because it's windy, and the wind carries the stench of dead bodies as well every now and again. But we feel it's necessary to report this very important story because Bucha, it is said and it is feared, is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to getting a real idea of the extent of the of potential war crimes, of civilian losses, either through war crimes or otherwise. Innocent people are the victims of wars always, and we see this once again. You can see drones as well in the sky. Ashok, in front of you over there, there's a drone, and this is actually being used not just by the media but by the investigators as well, to actually document every single part of the process through which these bodies are actually being recovered, and there's this constant effort at filming itself. The town of Bucha itself, large parts of it remain off limits. As the Russians were retreating, they were in fact mining parts of this area as well. So there are areas which we can't actually enter as well. So this is the very latest that you can see, and these pictures really do tell a story, and a very sad story of human loss, which is inevitable with war. This has been an exceptionally bloody war. The overall numbers of casualties on either side, whether it's Ukrainian or Russian, the numbers keep changing. It's unclear. And if this is the situation in the town of Bucha itself, imagine what it could be in a larger city, a city like Mariupol, which has been absolutely devastated in the south of this country, where again there have been very strong allegations of war crimes which have actually been coming in. So it's a frightening, sad process that is going on now, as you can see.
І правоохоронці України достануть кожного, хто вчинив ці криваві злочини проти мирних жителів.
We'll find out everyone who did these war crimes here.
On the way to Bucha, we came across this particular site. It's clearly an area where this group of Russian mainline tanks, in fact these are T-72 tanks, were ambushed. There are also several armored personnel carriers which have been deployed over here, which were completely destroyed. The Ukrainians in this entire area have been using anti-tank guided missiles very, very effectively, and that has proven to be something which was singularly responsible for the Russians being unable to actually penetrate through the Ukrainian defenses in this area. The Javelin anti-tank guided missile, as also some of the other guided anti-tank missiles being provided by some of their allies from Europe, have been decisive in taking out frontline Russian tanks. They've been able to penetrate the defenses of these tanks. As you can see, this is likely a T-72 or perhaps even a T-90 tank, which has been blown up completely. Many of these missiles are top attack missiles. In other words, missiles which actually fly and they hit the top, or they attack from the top of the tanks where the armor is actually the weakest, and they are designed to actually penetrate explosive reactive armor. The panels that you see over here, these are called, this is explosive reactive armor, and this is actually meant to protect the tank from guided anti-tank missiles. But the ones that I'm talking about, the latest generation, are able to actually approach from the top, penetrate these defenses, including penetrating explosive reactive armor through the nature of the warhead which they actually have. And once they're able to actually generate a shock wave inside the tank, the ordnance on board, the ammunition on board, it cooks off. And as you can see, the entire turret of this tank is located is located away from the tank itself. So on the right you can see the turret, and you can see the place where it's been blown off from over there. This is a frontline Russian tank, and in this particular site itself I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tanks and at least 3 armored personnel carriers destroyed in this one area. This was a site of a major battle which actually took place over here, a massive ambush, and the remnants of this area. Ashok, if you can come over here, it's all too visible. What you can actually see are the boots of some of the soldiers who were killed. You can see the boots of the soldiers who fought over here and who lost their lives, who perished in what appears to be some sort of an ambush which took place over here. This is frontline equipment destroyed. More signs of the battle over there. Many of those who were killed were incinerated inside these tanks. Their remains would still be inside this. But this is what the Russians would be working to avoid going forward when they launch their offensive, assuming they do, in the south and the east of the country, where there is a very heavy presence of Russian vehicles right now. So that gives you an idea of this tank graveyard that we came across. It is, and I'm just going to walk through this area, and Ashok, if you can just follow me. This is very much a tank graveyard, an area where there has been complete destruction, as we can see at this particular site. Several Russian tanks over here, armored personnel carriers. This is a BMP-2 or a BMP-3 armored personnel carrier, which is, it's less armored obviously than a tank, but it's been completely destroyed over here. Losses like this are staggering, but a loss like this in one area itself, it's a huge loss to any force. But as you can see, this is just one of several sites which have been littered. And in fact, Ashok, if you can just focus over here for a moment, this is actually one of the tanks which was destroyed, and it was hit by an anti-tank guided missile almost certainly, and the turret is right over here. So this is actually the turret of the tank itself. And I'm just going to come over here, and this is the main gun. This is where the gun comes from. This is where you come closer, Ashok. You can see the gun where you can load. This is the beginning of the gun. The loading actually takes place, and as you can see, the turret of the gun itself. And this is the armor which I was referring to. This is called explosive reactive armor. It's designed to block or to anti-tank guided missiles, but as I've been mentioning, it's the top attack missiles which render armor like this essentially ineffective. This has been a battle of technology as well. So you can see a lot of that in this tank graveyard. With Uma Shankar Singh and Ashok Mahale, near Bucha, Vishnu Shom for NDTV. One of the big concerns has actually been the fallout of Russian soldiers being in the Chernobyl plant. Remember the Chernobyl nuclear plant, which had seen the most horrific nuclear disaster several decades back, is in fact a leading power producer at this stage. But during the war, Russian forces actually managed to enter the Chernobyl plant. Now, the head of Ukraine's Chernobyl plant operator, they've got the plant back in their control, says something very important. He says that by being there, Russian soldiers potentially were endangering themselves because they were operating in areas where radioactivity has been very high.
The occupiers made their trenches in many places, so they made trenches, shelters for their big vehicles, and they even, as we saw, they even created their kitchens underground, sort of tents and fortifications, and one of those fortified positions was near the place where radioactive waste was temporarily placed, so-called Red Forest, where the level of radiation was among the highest in the whole exclusion zone. And when being there, the invaders were breathing with that dust, and they were active physically, so they would breathe more actively, and they inhaled those radionuclides. Some of them would feel it in months, some of them in years, but anyway, all that personnel which has been there will feel it.
Well, joining us now, Alexander Kara, the former diplomat, and Professor Scott Lucas, Emeritus Professor of International Politics at the University of Birmingham. I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. Professor Lucas, let me come to you first. Do you believe that by now, by this stage, there is already substantial evidence of Russian war crimes? Or do you believe that at one level this could be what the Ukrainians are saying and that more needs to be done internationally to find out about these allegations?
No, we need to be clear and not go into both sides. Ukraine said, Russia said here. To answer your first question, yes, there is substantial evidence. Your correspondents have been talking about it. The satellite imagery, the witness accounts, the video, the Russian military on audio talking about the mass killings, and now the bodies that are being exhumed from the mass graves, including behind the St. Andrew I Church. Now, formally, there has to be an investigation before you declare guilt over war crimes. That is what India has called for. That's what many countries have called for. And the International Criminal Court prosecutor, Karim Khan, is in Kyiv and visited Bucha today to start or to work with the launch of that investigation. So yes, we have to go through the formal process, but don't let that stand in the way and say there is no evidence up to this point of the atrocities, and let's call them the probable war crimes that were committed by the occupying Russian forces.
Yeah. Alexander Kara, do you believe that what we've been seeing today in Bucha, I spent several hours there today, watching the process as these bodies were exhumed. Do you believe that this is just the tip of the iceberg, that when the truth comes out over places like Mariupol, the extent of the human losses over there, allegations of war crimes would be much more clear?
First of all, I appreciate your personal presence there, and you're shedding the light onto the crimes. It's really important to show, especially to India, who is quite friendly to Russia and is trying to balance between Russia and the West. Secondly, yes, from the beginning, in 2014, Russia launched its illegal war, and it's actually a war crime, an aggressive war against Ukraine. It's a crime per se. Secondly, we've seen a long record of previous crimes during this 8-year war in Donbass, in my native city of Donetsk and around it. And now Russia is trying to recapture some lands of those former regions of Ukraine. And you are quite right to say about Mariupol. So far, according to the mayor of Mariupol, up to 10,000 civilians has been killed. And unfortunately, we might not be able to get the whole number because the Russians are using the mobile crematoriums and they are just burning those bodies. So that's why they are trying to cover those crimes, and certainly only witnesses can prove. But you understand, from the legal point of view, it might be less tangible than actual bodies of those being killed.
Right. Professor Lucas, in talking to many people, as I am over here in Kiev and in this area, the Ukrainians are clear that there's no question of them backing down as far as the Donbass region is concerned. They say they've been fighting a war over here for 8 years. They say that this is an invasion, and there is no question of not confronting the Russians. And then yesterday you had Vladimir Putin make the remark that talks have hit a dead end. So is it now inevitable that there is going to be further extension of this war, or are you still optimistic about the peace process, which so many of us were optimistic about till perhaps a few days back?
Again, thank you for being there on the spot to cut through the disinformation and to provide the facts. And again, we need to be honest here, that there is no peace process because at this point, Vladimir Putin does not want to negotiate with Ukraine. There had been the pretense of negotiations earlier on, but the Russians effectively just went through that to try to get space for their military operations. Now, they have failed with Plan A, which was to get into Kyiv, to get into Kharkiv, to topple the Ukrainian government. Now they go to Plan B, which again, as you and your correspondents are pointing out so well, is to expand that area around the Russian proxy groups in the east of the country, in the Donbass, and to try to finally conquer Mariupol so they have that southern strip along the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. So we need to have eyes open wherever we are in the international community, that we may want peace, we may want talks, but until Vladimir Putin accepts the fact that he cannot win on the ground militarily, we will not have genuine negotiations.
Ambassador Kara, how do you see this playing out? Because it's almost happening in slow motion. When wars actually take place, there's an element of surprise. But every single day, there are satellite images of the Russians building up. These are the areas where the Russians have now deployed. This is where they've set up their hospitals in the southeast of Ukraine. This is where they've actually deployed their forces in larger numbers, etc., etc. How do you actually see this playing out going forward?
Well, we were capable of withstanding this war of aggression for 49 days already, and certainly we are not going to step back. And actually, we have no choice, because if you listen to what the political elite in Moscow is talking about, they are talking about solving or finally solving Ukrainian issue. And it refers to the final solution of the Jew issue during the Second World War. A lot of so-called intellectuals in Russia are claiming that, they need to Ukraine to vanish and as a separate entity, as the ethnic entity. So it's a war of extinction in the beginning. So that's why there is no other way for Ukraine but to fight back. Secondly, we saw that
our at this stage, it is obviously a cause of huge concern now going forward where this is all going to be, because it just appears that the bloodbath which we've seen in Ukraine is likely to be extended with war almost certainly likely to take place. I'd like to thank you both very much for being with us. As we wrap up this program, what I'd like to do is actually go through a couple of the coup questions which our viewers have been responding to, offering their comments on, etc. So it's let's just take a look at those as we try and get an idea of what people are saying. I'd like to thank our guests once again for being with us. We'll continue to bring you reports from the ground as we travel around this area, give you an idea of the true extent of the devastation which Russia has left behind when they exited this area. It's a slow process because even getting into these areas is extremely difficult. We're out of time on Left, Right and Center. From all of us here, goodbye.